Encounters with star people. A Native American elder says they meant us no harm. This is what a grandpa called them, our ancestors. In this particular story, Clark spoke to a man connected through a mutual friend on the Navajo Indian Reservation named Darren. Clark spoke to his aunt, who was the one who told her of his extraterrestrial experiences. Richard Wagamisi, who was of Canada's foremost authors and storytellers from the Wabaseemoong First Nation in northwest Ontario, once wrote, "My people tell of star people who came to us many generations ago. The star people brought spiritual teachings and stories and maps of the cosmos, and they offered these freely. They were kind, loving, and set a great example. When they left us, my people say, there was a loneliness like no other." Another example from Canada comes from Stéphane Woutani, who is a Plains Cree and French-Canadian author and storyteller. He has explained that his perception and understanding of the ET phenomena as a Native person and its global implications comes from having been partially raised within the culture itself. He's made it a clear point to mention that they give far greater attention to the seeking of the spiritual understanding of things. He heard about distant relations and star people living among the stars many times. These stories were told around campfires and at the time of traditional get-togethers. Far from being anything to be feared, star people, he said, was just another term I grew up around. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. Stories of the star people are well documented in Native Canadian and Native American lore. And in the article here, I will share a story, as I've done so many times before, from the work of Dr. R.D. Clark, a professor emeritus at Montana State University, who is Cherokee Choctaw. She's been researching the star people, collecting encounters between them and Native Indians for many years. She also grew up being told about the star people from her family and her elders. She's written multiple books documenting her research. This particular one is taken from her book, Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. And of course, they have to do with extraterrestrials, or who they believed looked so different and were so spiritually advanced from us that they took them as extraterrestrials because they landed with spacecraft or aircraft and very strange flying shields. So in this particular story, Clark spoke to a man connected through a mutual friend on the Navajo Indian Reservation named Darren. Clark spoke to his aunt, who was the one who told her of his extraterrestrial experiences. "I am not the first in my family to see the sky gods. My grandfather told me that one time a spacecraft landed over in New Mexico and some Indians hid an alien," said Darren. He said it happened back in the 1940s. It was about the same time as Roswell, by the way, July 4th, 1947. "My grandfather said that he and some of his friends came upon the alien wandering in the desert. They realized he was one of the sky gods, and they hid him from the government soldiers. He died, though, and they buried him. I saw an alien once. He came to my grandfather's hogan. When I saw him, I was frightened, but I did not know he was an alien at the time. He was a stranger. I was afraid of all strangers, so I ran inside and told my grandfather that there was a man outside. My grandfather turned off the burner on his hot plate and walked outside. I couldn't hear, but I'm sure they were talking. When my grandfather came inside and told me to come with him, I walked outside and the alien was leaning against the wall looking at a small metal object. I reached for my grandfather's hand, but he told me not to be afraid. He said everything was all right. He was tall, he was dark skin and dark eyes. I never saw his hair. His clothes were brown and form-fitting. He had a strange pair of boots. The pants were stuffed inside. The boots had pointed toes. They were the same color as the suit. I had never seen clothes like that. Gloves covered his hands, and there was some kind of covering over his head like a hood of some sort, but it was really tight like elastic. He communicated with my grandfather. We walked off into the canyon with him. My grandfather stopped a few times and checked footprints. He was backtracking. They led to a large craft on the other side of the ridge. Clark asked, "Are you telling me the alien was lost?" That's what my grandfather told me. He was part of a small exploring party. They had separated and he had gone up one canyon and the others went into other directions. He had some equipment with him that was supposed to get him back to the craft, but it quit working. He came to our hogan looking for help. My grandfather and I took him back to his craft. My grandfather and I talked about it often. After that, when my grandfather told stories, he would begin with, "It happened before the Starman or after the Starman." My grandfather said that when he was a boy, there were many stories about star people, but that this was only the second time he had ever seen one. He mostly talked about how they were friendly and meant us no harm. Grandpa called them our ancestors. He said that they had visited Earth from the beginning of time. They come to remind us to keep everything in harmony. He called them seed layers. In other words, they were the entities that were laying seeds. By seed layers, Darren meant, they brought seeds to Earth to see if they would grow and then come back to check on them. Darren believed his grandfather meant plants, animals, and humans. He was also told by his grandfather that they brought animals. Clark then asked, "Why did you go near the spacecraft?" Darren replied, "I wanted to, but my grandfather warned me away. He said I should not touch it." It was round, silver, but dull silver. There were no windows, only a door, and when it closed, you could not see where the door had been. Clark asks, "When your grandfather led the Starman back to the craft, did the other beings see you?" "Yes, they came out and greeted their friend. I watched as he turned to my grandfather as though he were introducing him. The other starmen bowed, and for a moment they stood there and talked with him, but I could not hear. When they boarded the craft, my grandfather told me we must move to a safe distance. When we watched as the craft moved upward, it did not even stir up the dust. That was the most amazing thing to me. When the wind blows, there is always dust, but when the craft lifted off the ground, there was no dust. For some reason, I understood that there was nothing normal about this situation. I was afraid of strangers anyway, but these strangers were not like the people I saw in town. They were different. I held my grandfather's hand all the way home. Somehow, it felt safer." Darren goes on to describe that the Starman appeared 2 more times when he was much older. The final time when his grandfather was in his 80s, sick and unwell in bed. He said, "It was late at night when the Starman appeared suddenly without warning. He walked over to my grandfather's bed and knelt over him. After a moment or two, he walked out." Clark asked, "What did your grandfather say about the meeting?" And Darren replied, "Only that the Starman came to say they were waiting for him. 3 days later, my granddad died at the clinic in town. Just hours before he passed, he told me that they would be coming for him." This was the last meeting. During the second meeting, grandfather gave the Starman a pouch with turquoise stones inside, a gift that pleased the Starman. 2 years after his grandfather's death, Clark stopped off at Darren's mother's house. Darren invited her to go outside to his workshop. "I go to grandfather's place and work in the summers. In the winter, I work here when I am not traveling with art shows." Clark interrupted, "Have you ever seen the Starman again?" "No, but I know he still comes here," he replied as he unlocked the workshed. "I was hoping you would come to see me again. I have something for you. But first I have to tell you what happened. Last summer I spent about a month out of the home place. My sister was getting married and everything was chaotic around here. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at the Hogan was a bag in the doorway of the little workshop I had set up for myself years ago. It was my grandfather's pouch. It was the one his grandfather gave to the Starman. I opened it and the turquoise stones fell out. They were the ones grandfather had given the Starman. For some reason, he returned them. I think it was my grandfather's way of letting me know that everything was okay with him. I have no other explanation. The takeaway. When you dive deep into this topic, it leads to so many other topics and opens up so many more questions that are too many to explain here. As I always say, it truly leaves no aspect of humanity untouched, and it will transform human consciousness in a major way. There is still so much we have to discover about ourselves, as well as the cosmos, and I imagine here there are unimaginable amount of worlds out there with an unimaginable amount of races that are doing star travel. Hopefully, like the one in this story, most of the ones who are and have been visiting our planets are benevolent, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it's my belief that this topic forces humanity to question itself and truly ponder why we live the way we do here. We are a race of extreme potential and have the means to create a human experience where all life and the planet itself can thrive. So I ask yourself, why aren't we doing that? What's the problem, and why are we destroying our planet? This is from Collective Evolution, here under Creative Commons on Collective Spark by Arjun Walia of Collective Evolution. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.